Okay, well, I'm gonna get started. Yes. Yes, it is working. I can see your comments there. Okay, well, I'm gonna get started. Yes. Yes. Okay. Do you have a microphone or camera, Jeanette? That may also be why it's not showing if you don't have a camera turned on. Let me try one of those. Martin, can you hear me okay now? If you haven't already watched the video for the teacher training setup, you'll need to set up Slack, which you can get to from sparkappleague.slack.com. If you don't have an account, you'll need to set one up. And then we're in the teacher's room, basically taking questions. Can you hear me? Hello? If you have a microphone and a headset, you can also join into the Hangout using the headset so that you can actually ask your questions live as well. There's also a chat window here on the left-hand side. If you click this first item up at the top, there's live chat in the Hangout as well. So what I'm going over right now is just the basics of the Scratch interface. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the Q&A section or in the Slack channel. I'll be picking up and answering questions throughout the entire session. If you guys can hear me, go ahead and type in a quick message into the Slack channel or into the chat here, just so I can tell that you're following along and that you can hear. Okay, so in Scratch, one of the first things that you need to do in order for any of these blocks to make any kind of sense whatsoever is we need to set it up so that our game starts when somebody actually loads it. In this case, you load the game, as I mentioned before, by clicking this green flag in the top right of the Scratch stage. So right now we don't have anything happening. We click the green flag and it just kind of doesn't do anything. So what we need to do is tell Scratch to start something when we click the green flag. In this case, that's going to be under the events panel. Now, events are the most basic programming concept that Scratch has. Our very first event is when we click that flag. So all we need to do to kind of set up our basic program is grab that when flag clicked block and drag it onto our workspace. Okay, and what that's going to do is that just tells Scratch, just like it sounds, when we click the flag, do this. In this case, because we have Scratch the Cat highlighted in our sprites panel on the left-hand side, this is only going to apply to him. So when the flag is clicked, do this with Scratch the Cat. So I'm going to start by going back to our motion panel. And as I said, we can double click to get Scratch to move 10 spaces to the right or 10 spaces to the left. And I'm just going to drag that underneath here. You'll notice it kind of snaps into place as you get close. There's a little outline that shows up, and when I let go, it just snaps the piece into place. So now what that does is when I click the green flag, Scratch is going to move 10 spaces to the right, and then our program stops. So every time I click this, he's going to move 10 spaces to the right. And again, if I change this and make it negative, and then click the flag, he's going to move 10 spaces to the left each time. Each time I click, he's going to move that many spaces to the left and to the right. Okay, so using this, we can start to kind of chain different blocks together. So I'm going to say when the flag is clicked, move Scratch 10 steps to the left, 10 steps to the right. I'm going to move him 10 steps back, and then 10 steps right again. So 10 to the left, 10 to the right, 10 to the left, 10 to the right. If this all works out, then he should basically just end up in the same spot that he started. So again, I'll click the flag, and nothing happened. Okay, the reason why nothing happened is because when you have blocks that happen sequentially, unless there's some kind of other block that tells Scratch to wait, they all happen immediately at the same time. So right now, when I click the green flag, Scratch moves 10 steps to the left, 10 to the right, 10 to the left, 10 to the right, all at the same time, and ends up in the same spot that he started. If I take one of these blocks and move them off, you'll see that we see the end result right away. If I put it back and click it again, nothing happens. You don't see anything happen. So this is where we go into some of the other blocks that we have. In this case, they're in the control section. The control section is where the majority of our programming logic is going to be, or our coding logic. If you're familiar with code at all, that's great. If not, not a big deal. We're going to go through every single one of these control blocks, just like we're going to go through every single one of these motion blocks, and kind of explain what they do and how you use them in your code. In this case, I want the very first block, which is just wait X amount of seconds, or however many seconds. Exactly, Jeanette. You need a spacer kind of that just tells Scratch to wait a certain amount of time before it moves on to the next one. As we get a little bit more advanced, we're going to add blocks that actually make decisions. So they're not just going to sit there and wait for 10 seconds. They're actually going to say, if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. If something else happens, wait a few seconds and then do this. In this case, we're just going to do the wait block. So I'm going to add a wait block. And one of the nice things about Scratch is you'll notice that all of these blocks are already snapped together, but I can still insert things in between the blocks. So I'm just going to add a bunch of these wait blocks in between these steps. Now, when I click on the green flag, you'll see Scratch move 10 steps to the left. He'll wait for a second, move to the right, wait a second, so on. So he just kind of does his little dance there. Just left, right, left, right. Okay. As you're running your program, or once you click the green flag, one of the things that you'll notice about your workspace that's really, really nice for figuring out problems with your Scratch project, or in this case, what we call debugging, is that the section of your workspace that's currently active will highlight. So as I click the green flag, notice that there's kind of a yellow glow that goes around those blocks. That means that that's what Scratch is in the middle of running. So it highlights and then shows you exactly which block. we're going to do. Okay, some of the other motions that we can do that we're just going to add on to this section just to kind of show you exactly what Scratch can do. We'll basically add each one of these in turn. And then add some of those weight blocks. So once I click this, Scratch is going to run through every single one of these one step at a time. Okay, now one of the things that you might have noticed is that when it got to the change X by 10 block, that's basically the same thing as move 10 steps with one big exception. In Scratch, we have the ability to turn or rotate our sprite or our character by a certain amount or a certain direction. The move X steps block moves the character in that direction that many steps or that many pixels. So since Scratch is pointed to the right now, move 10 steps will move him to the right 10 steps. Okay? The change X and change Y blocks move Scratch by that many pixels on the X axis or the Y axis, regardless of what direction he's facing. So this is useful in games where your character can look or rotate in a certain direction, but also move, for example, with the arrow keys in a separate direction. It's basically uncoupled. Move X steps moves in the direction that the character is actually facing. Okay, so now I'm going to change our X and Y steps just to move Scratch back into place. And I'm going to run it again. And again, as you see in the corner, Scratch position is updating. He goes left, right. Y moves up and down. Okay, so in your projects, feel free to kind of set up some basic movement just to play around with it. We're going to continue on and actually make this movement a little bit more meaningful, in this case, not just him dancing around. So I'm going to delete all these blocks. I'm going to leave the block for our when flag clicked, because that's kind of our main action block. And we need Scratch to do things when we actually use the program. So we're going to leave that there. But what I am going to do is I'm going to go to this go to X and Y coordinate block. I'm going to change both of these to 0. I like to use this block a lot to just reset my characters back to the middle of the screen. So if you do move them around and make changes to them, this is an easy way to get them to go to a specific spot, especially when you have games. Here's a small game that I created using Scratch. And one of the things that happens is you can move Scratch around with the mouse, and he catches these little cookies. So that X and Y block is really, really helpful if I want to set him up at a specific spot on the screen. That way, no matter where I move him on accident, I can always get him back to the spot that I want when my game starts. So in this case, I'm going to load a background so that Scratch kind of has someplace where he can live. Now, backgrounds in Scratch are called backdrops. So if I click here in our sprite section on the stage on the left here, you'll see it says 1 backdrop. Okay. And again, that's just a fancy word for the background. I can create a new backdrop by either picking one from the Scratch library. There's beaches, there's forests, hayfields, parking ramps, cities, things like that. You can also paint your own backdrops, and you can load backdrops from files. Did I lose everybody? So in this case, I'm going to take this backdrop, which is currently blank, and I'm going to click on the Backdrops tab here in the middle. And rather than replacing this backdrop with a second one, I'm just going to change what it looks like. And I can do that either by drawing, and you'll notice that appears immediately on the Scratch stage, or I can load one from the library. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to load Scratch into this goal. Let's use that one. He's in a stadium. So now I can switch between these backdrops just by clicking on them. And you'll notice it immediately updates on our stage. And in this case, I don't need this one, so I'm going to click the little X in the top right to get rid of it. So now Scratch is in the middle of the football field, and I can just click and drag him to move him around. Or I can use our script and position him in exactly the spot that I want. In this case, you'll notice that the position updated to where I dragged him. So again, this is a nice way to kind of get our reset here. So if I ever accidentally move Scratch or program or code something that moves him out of the way, I can simply just double click on him to get him back to this area. It will always update his position here in our scripts panel. Okay, but once I drag that onto the workspace, that position is saved. So now I can tell Scratch that when my game starts, always move him to that same spot. No matter what happens, put him back to the spot that we had him in. Okay. Now, I obviously want him to do something, so I'm going to start off by just having him follow my mouse. So I'm going to take this block that says go to mouse pointer, and I'm going to add that to our project. Now, one of the things that you'll notice happens is, just like we explained before, as soon as I press the green flag, it's going to do those items in exactly that order. Okay, so we never really got to see our reset. Scratch just kind of moved there and then jumped right to that spot. Right to the mouse pointer. As soon as I click the flag, I can move him back. But as soon as I double click on the flag, he's going to try and get as close to that pointer as possible. Okay. Now, this isn't really useful because he only does that and then stops. So what we need to do is we need to tell Scratch to do that all the time. As long as our program is running, as long as that green flag is going, we want him to follow our mouse. Okay. So what I'm going to do is go back to our control blocks where we had our wait times. And I have some other blocks that will allow me to repeat or redo actions for as long as I need to do them. Okay, I can have them repeat a certain amount of times. In this case, it's defaulted to 10. Or I can tell Scratch to do that same thing over and over forever. Okay, So I'm going to take the forever block because I want him, at least for now, to always follow my mouse. No matter what, I don't ever want him to stop until I stop the program. So I'm just going to grab that. And again, Scratch is smart enough to realize that you're trying to snap these blocks to different sections. So you'll notice that if I snap it before the mouse pointer section, it'll actually insert that go-to block inside of the forever block. So now what happens is when I click the green flag, he's just going to follow my mouse all the way around. Okay, so already you can tell this is something that can make the game a little bit more worthwhile because now we've run the program and we're actually doing something. You'll notice again that our blocks on the right-hand workspace are highlighted in yellow because this block is going forever and it's just going to repeat over and over and over again. And Scratch is just going to follow my mouse. Anybody have any questions on that so far? Feel free to type them into the Slack channel or use the QA section. If you need me to clarify anything, I'll be more than happy to. Otherwise, just give me a thumbs up in Slack. Okay, so I'm going to stop our program for now. And I'm going to reset Scratch back to his little spot. One of the nice things about Scratch is you can duplicate any block just by right-clicking on it, and it'll duplicate the whole section and kind of attach it to your mouse. I'm not dragging or anything. I just click duplicate, and it won't let go of this block until I click on it somewhere. So that way I can have multiples of these. If I need to reset Scratch to that same spot, I can just double-click that. Now, let's make our game actually do something. So I'm going to add another sprite. As I mentioned kind of at the beginning, if everybody was here, sprites are all the characters or items or anything that actually has any kind of movement or can do anything in our game. So since we have a goal as our backdrop, I'm just going to add a soccer ball or some kind of ball that we can use and have it interact with Scratch a little bit. So I'm going to take a new sprite. In this case, I'm going to load it from the Scratch library since this is one of the ones that Scratch already has included. We've got basketball, baseball. I'm sure there's a soccer ball here somewhere. There's a soccer ball. So I'm going to load in a soccer ball. And you'll notice now that I have two sprites on this panel. Same as before, I can click and drag this to move the ball around. And you'll notice that my workspace changes as I flip back and forth between the different characters or the different sprites. So Scratch, the cat, still has his blocks that we've put in there. And the soccer ball doesn't have anything because we haven't done anything yet. So first thing I'm going to do is the soccer ball seems a little oversized. So I'm going to use some of these blocks to change the way that that soccer ball looks. If I click on the looks section, we've got some other blocks that we're going to use. In this case, I want to use a block that sets the size. So I'm going to set the size of that soccer ball to 50%. Okay, now, I want this to happen every single time we start the game. I don't want it to just happen just this time. So the same way that I set up my controls for Scratch the Cat, I'm going to set them up for the soccer ball. When I click the green flag under the events section, take that block and set the size to, in this case, 50%. So what that means is that whenever I click the green flag to start my program, Scratch is going to follow the mouse, and you'll notice that size of our ball no matter what. But I may want to have that happen every time anyway, because I may want to change the size of the ball at some point during my game. This just ensures that every time that I start this game, it resets to that same size. Okay. So now if I click the flag, Scratch is going to follow the mouse. The soccer ball stays at its 50% size because there's no change there. And we move around. Click back on him, reset his position. So now what we want to do is we want to set our game to actually do something. Okay, this is a really basic, I would probably even hesitate to call it a game, but in this case, we want our game to do something. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the game when it starts, move Scratch around, and if Scratch touches the ball, have it kick the ball into the goal. All right, so the first thing I need to do is figure out exactly how far the ball in its current position is from the goal. So I'm going to change that X position. Okay. If I change the X position, that's going to move the ball directly to that spot. So if I say change the X position by 50, there, you'll notice it moved a little bit to the right, a little bit more to the right, and each time I click that green flag, it moves a little bit more to the right. Okay. So just like we did with Scratch, we're going to set the position of the ball. And again, you'll notice our go-to block changes its position when we drag. And I'm going to save that here and then have his position, or the ball's position, reset just like we did with Scratch. When we click the flag, reset its position to the start spot, set the size to 50%, and then this block, we're going to actually have it interact somehow. Something's going to happen to cause this block to fire. Okay, so far so good. So now, what needs to happen in order for that block to fire? In this case, we said that we want that ball to move when Scratch kicks it, or when he touches it. So I'm going to go through here and go to the sensing section. And the sensing section has all kinds of different blocks that allow you to determine what happens with that sprite. In this case, we have some blocks for if that block is touching something, if that block touches a specific color, how far away that block is there a key that's currently pressed on our keyboard, is the mouse being held down, all these different senses. And again, just like with the other blocks, as we get farther into this, we'll go through what each of these does. But for now, I need to figure out if Scratch the cat is touching the ball. Okay, so I'm going to drag that touching block. And Scratch is sprite number 1, so I'm going to choose sprite number 1 from the list. Okay, if that doesn't really make sense, or it might get confusing later on, we can always click on Scratch the cat here, and he's got a little eye in the upper right-hand corner of the sprite screen for information. You can click on that and rename him. You can click on that and rename him Scratch the cat. And he'll show up as Scratch the cat. That's this little blue and white lowercase letter I in the corner of the Scratch window. If I click on that, I get kind of the info panel that allows me to name Scratch. It shows me his current position, his current rotation, and then I click the little blue arrow to return there. So now when I go to my ball, this makes a little bit more sense. Touching Scratch the cat. So if at any point the ball touches Scratch the cat, or the opposite, Scratch the cat touches the ball, some kind of action is going to happen. Okay, so let's set this up we're going to go back to our control blocks. And the control is where our wait and our repeat forever is. This next section says if, and there's kind of like this oblong shape, I guess. It looks kind of like a diamond or a gem shape. If this gem shape, then, and then the end of the block. Okay, so what we're going to do is drag that onto our stage. And we're going to take this touching block and drag it into that gem section. So now we've basically made a new block that says, if touching scratch the cat, so in this case, because we're on our soccer ball, if the soccer ball is touching scratch the cat, then do this, do something. Okay? And in this case, we want that ball to move a certain distance. I'm going to change this to 300. It's a nice big distance. And I'm going to include and attach that to our main block. Okay, so what will happen now is when we click the green flag, our soccer ball is going to go to this position. It's going to set the size to 50%, which shouldn't change much. And then if it's touching scratch the cat, then we move the X position of the ball into the goal. And I'm just guessing on that 300. It might not make it to the goal. We can adjust that as we go. So I'm going to hit the flag. Scratch jumps to our mouse pointer. Whoops, nothing happens. Okay, you might recall this problem from when we got scratch moving. Can anybody tell me why this isn't working? This happened with Scratch, the cat, before too. The answer is pretty simple. If you look at what we did for Scratch so far, you probably can clue into what's going on. We're missing our forever block. So right now, our code, if we click if touching scratch the cat, then change this, it only happens once. Scratch only checks once for this to happen, and it only checks it when we click the flag. Once we've clicked the flag, that stops, and it doesn't do it anymore. So if we add our forever block, again, it'll automatically wrap around. Now what's going to happen is it's going to get to this spot, and it's constantly going to check to see if Scratch is touching the ball. So if we start this now, you'll notice as soon as I restarted the game, as soon as I touch it, the ball goes into the goal. I'm just going to keep kicking that for a little while. Now, if you look at our game, you don't need a spacer unless you want it to wait for some period of time. So right now, because he kicks the ball into the goal, it doesn't do much. We don't need the spacer. But later on, as our interactions with our different sprites get more complicated, yeah, we might want to have some spacers. We might want to have the ball wait. In this case, if I restart this, it doesn't make sense to have a spacer just because once he touches the ball, we want that to immediately happen. One of the issues that you might be seeing is that it just kind of disappears from the one spot and appears in the other spot. And that's definitely an improvement we can make. So let's try that. In our motion section, right now we're having the motion change by 300. We're telling the X position to change by 300. Okay. Some of these other blocks that are a little bit nicer are the glide block. The glide block here basically allows us to set a position and a distance over a certain period of time. So in this case, I can tell it to take 2 seconds. This is kind of like a combination between the spacer block and our position block. If we kind of mushed them together, we're going to tell Scratch to take that ball and glide it over 2 seconds from wherever it is currently to a new position. So in this case, I'm going to move the X block to about X equals 200. I'm choosing X equals 200 because if I move my mouse on the screen here, the stage at the bottom gives me X and Y coordinates for my mouse. And 200 will basically put the ball right about here, which seems like it's good enough to get into the goal. And negative 77 is about here. So 200, negative 77 is approximately there. And now if I run my program, you'll actually see some movement happening. Instead of just appearing in one spot or disappearing from one spot and then appearing in the next spot, when Scratch kicks the ball, it kicks right into the goal. Oop. And into the goal. Okay, so this isn't much of a game at this point, but this should at least familiarize you a little bit with kind of the basic motions of Scratch. Next week, we're going to continue teacher training and teacher training number 2, and I'll actually show you how to add in a little bit more complicated logic that will do something a little bit more interesting than this. We'll start by building our stage, putting in a character, and then more than likely we're going to recreate this kitty drop game, which basically just allows Scratch to catch the fortune cookies. And you'll notice the score goes up. He's following our mouse. And then once he reaches multiples of 10, the game speeds up and becomes a little bit harder. You've got 3 lives in the bottom right-hand corner. So that will be our goal for the next teacher training session next week, is to kind of get a actual game going where there's score, there's a win-lose condition. In this case, there'll be some lives that he can lose. Should probably be 9 since he's a cat, but we won't hold it against him. For now, though, you should be able to at least play around with Scratch, get a little bit more familiar with it, try and figure out what the different motion blocks do, and then we'll touch on what each of those do specifically next time as we get farther into our game. It's 7:30. If you'd like, I can continue and keep going. We can make this a little bit more fleshed out. Otherwise, if you guys want to play around with it, I do have some time for questions and answers. So feel free to click the QA button on the left-hand side of the Hangouts window and ask your questions, or feel free to post them in the Slack channel. I will also be in the Slack channel all day, every day, Monday through Thursday. So if you guys have any questions at all, if you're working on Scratch in your free time and you have some questions about what any of the blocks do, or if you get stuck on something, you can always type your questions into the teachers channel, and then we can answer them from there. So if you have any questions, I'll stay on for a couple more minutes. Next week's training will happen at the same time. I'll also have some repeats of this first training on Wednesday and on Thursday. I'm still taking feedback for times, but currently they're tentatively scheduled at 12:30 and 3:30. Next week, Monday, we'll start session number 2, Monday at 6:30 again, and I'll try to go for an hour also, unless you guys have additional time and like to stay after, we can keep working. But I'm always available for you guys. You can always email me, admin@sparkappleleague.com. As I said, you can post your questions, or if you just have anything you want to say in the Slack channel, and then you can always submit your questions ahead of time in the Q&A section for any of the teacher trainings ahead of time. So that way I'll see them as soon as the training starts, and I can answer those questions before we get into the next training lesson. All right, so I'll stay on for a couple more minutes. Other than that, you guys are free to go. And if you need anything else from me, you know how to get in touch with me. I'll hang out for about 10-15 minutes for any additional questions. Awesome. We'll also have student training that's very similar to this starting in March. I just wanted to kind of give you guys a head start on this a little bit so that you're familiar with Scratch. Ideally, before March 1st, we're going to do a teacher training session each week from now until March 1st. And that will basically get you guys from the point of not knowing anything about Scratch, hopefully, to at least having a basic game. So that way, when the students start in March, you'll have a little bit of lead time and you can answer some of their questions if they get stuck on anything. The students will also have a Slack channel for asking questions as well that I'll be on all day, every day. But for now, I just, like I said, wanted to get you guys started a little bit in advance so that you can be prepared for when student training starts in March. I also want to show you guys, for those of you that are still hanging out, some of the other projects that have been created. Some of the comments we usually get when we're doing these Scratch sessions are that they seem too basic or that you can't really do anything complicated in Scratch. And frankly, I just don't think that's true. So here's a project that was made in Scratch using all the same blocks that we're going to be using, just a little bit more complicated, and the logic is a little bit tougher. But this is a lunar lander game. Where you try to land a little moon rover. There's also another favorite of mine, Mario Kart. Somebody actually recreated Mario Kart in Scratch, which I think is amazing for a project of that size. So this is all done in Scratch. I'm obviously not doing very well. So some pretty cool things that you can do. All right, any other questions? Okay, then that concludes our teacher training number 1. If you do have any questions, like I said, just get in touch with me and we'll get you going. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good day.